What's up, fam? It's Brian Castrillo. Just watched The Last of Us, Season 1, Episode 8. We only got one more, folks, and my goodness, what an episode. But before I get into it, I'm just going to put a little viewer discretion. There is some mature stuff in this episode I'm going to go over, and just be advised before we get into it. And my goodness, what an episode. Oh, man. And I am going to invoke some comparisons with some characters within the Walking Dead universe, because to me, The Walking Dead is the gold standard in creating an apocalyptic universe. And sometimes in cinema, movies, TV shows, there are moments or episodes where the scene sort of transcends what the actor is doing. Now, I want to say that I've enjoyed every single episode of The Last of Us so far. The little minor details I would have changed in certain things, but overall, I absolutely enjoyed it. Now, The Walking Dead has had many moments within the Walking Dead universe, within that show, that just made you feel something, like just felt in the moment, just really made you feel. Now, that doesn't take away from anything the actors are doing, because in The Last of Us, as well as in The Walking Dead, the acting has been brilliant many times, but sometimes the scene itself, the actors are so good within the scene, and this combined with the writing and the scene, and everything just comes together and just kind of pulls you in and makes you feel something. That's what this episode was. And I have not felt something like this until this episode. Every single episode before was really good, but this had some moments that made you go, "Oh, gee!" Like you were in that moment. You really felt it. And kudos to everyone involved in this episode. Absolutely brilliant. And we begin this episode starting with a guy named David, and of course he's played by Scott Shepherd. Which, wow, this guy had put on a performance in this episode. But we're starting it without. It's kind of a somber moment, and we see him giving sort of a sermon. He's, quoting the Bible to a bunch of people, and it's in Colorado. We're still there. It's a horrible winter storm, and he's kind of preaching about how they're going to get through this. But the overall thing is, he's talking about a little girl's father who they had lost, and he had died, and really, really sad, and it's kind of heartbreaking. With at the end of the sermon, he mentions, or she mentions, like, will we be able to bury my father? And he tells her, I'm sorry, but we have to wait till after the storm, because it's, the ground is too hard. We can't do it right now. And he's talking about how they're starving, and they're gonna go out, and he believes he saw some deer and some other animal. I can't remember what it was, but he's going to go hunting, and he's going to go get them some food. So really heartbreaking moment. Then we see Ellie, and she's taking care of Joel, who's still kind of out of it. They show the stab wound that he has, and he's sweating. He's looking pretty rough. And she ends up going out, and she's gonna go, she goes hunting. We see her looking for, she ends up, well, first she saw a bunny, and then she failed. She fell on her face, which I have to admit, I kind of giggled at that. And by the way, Bella Ramsey, this is peak performance for her in this episode. But she eventually sees a deer, and through what she learned from Joel, she shoots him dead on. But as most hunters know, a lot of times you shoot a deer, because how big it is, they're not going to go down right away. They're going to, go galloping off, and you just kind of have to follow them until the deer finally falls, which he does. And then you see David and James. Now, James is played by Troy Baker. And for those of you that don't know, Troy Baker is the voice of Joel in The Last of Us game, which I think it's fantastic that he got a cameo in this, and he is David's right-hand man. And they're talking about, taking this deer, and this was a pretty big buck, but Ellie is no slouch. She was right on the trail, and she stops him and basically says, get away from the deer. That's her deer. And David is, trying to talk to her, and he's like telling her, I can help you. And Ellie, being, who she is, she's like, no, fuck that. Get away from my deer. This is my kill. Go on to wherever you're from. And he's just saying, he's continuing to talk. And one thing about David, he is very kind of, I don't want to say charismatic, but he knows how to grab an audience. He knows how to talk, and he continues to do this to Ellie, which eventually they come to a bargain where she says, I'll give you half the deer if you can give, medicine that you just promised, which he tells James Troy Baker to go get some penicillin, which, he does. And this gives a moment for David and Ellie to talk. And he's, talking about how he's a leader. He's talking about how, you can come. He's asking her, like, who she's with, and he has his community, and he's basically telling her how he leads these people. And then he tells her that he had once sent 4 men out to go scavenge to help them get food because they're, a community that's hungry. And one of them got killed by a young girl and a man. And I'm like, oh shit, these are the guys that they just met at the university. And so David is the man who sent these 4 out. Now, David he's starting to, feel weird. But at this moment, I couldn't quite put a tick on it. But I already knew that this was trouble because, he's upset and he knows, what happened to his men. But I wasn't putting 2 and 2 together at this point. This is a community that has no food. They needed the deer, and bad things happen, especially within an apocalypse. But one of the things that he says to her is, I believe everything happens for a reason. And he says this right before he tells her this information that basically Ellie comes to him, and then she tells him what he knows and how everything kind of all sticks together. And, immediately my mind's blown on this moment. Eventually, he gives, James comes back with the penicillin, and he's not liking that David's going to let her go. But he basically says, we'll figure it out tomorrow, but yeah, just let her go with this. And so, Ellie goes back to Joel. She's, pumping him with the penicillin. Meanwhile, they go back to, where, James and David are from. And when David gets back, he's talking to them, and he realizes, and he says, I got this big deer. But right before that, they show, the cook, they're starting to prepare some sort of soup, and a guy comes in and he brings this cut up meat, and she's like, what's this? And he's like, it's venison. And I'm like, oh yeah, they did get a deer. But then at this moment, David comes in and he's talking about how he just got a deer. I'm like, wait a minute, what? I thought they didn't have any food. And even at this moment, I'm like, what is going on? Is this guy just lying? Is he just, and this guy is kind of reminding me somewhat of the governor at this moment. Like, he knows how to talk to people, he knows how to convince people, and basically just sort of make them feel like everything he's doing for them is the right thing, and he's their protector, their caretaker. This guy was giving me governor vibes, but that I didn't quite know. Like, I just knew something was up when he brought in the meat. I'm like, okay, maybe he's lying about this, because literally the deer's right there. He said he had no food, but anyways, I digress. But then after he's talking to him, there's something up, because the look in people's faces are like, what the hell? And that's because James had told them earlier that they found Ellie, and of course this is the people who shot, that guy who we figure out now is the father of that little girl. And she's upset, and she tells him to, why don't you just kill them both? And immediately he's upset, David, and he smacks her. I'm like, oh my god, this guy is not there is something wrong with this man. But then now we see, then he basically says we're gonna go hunt it, find them tomorrow. It won't be hard in the snow. We can track them, whatever. So then, Ellie, we see her, trying to take care of him, but then she realizes that there's these 4 men. She sees them coming. She barricades the door for Joel, gives him a knife, and says, don't, you got to wake up, you got to stay up. And she goes out and she tries to distract him on a horse. The horse gets shot, and she gets thrown, and she basically gets taken away. And then meanwhile we see Joel, and he is the one of the guys is coming down the stairs, because he basically, well, right before that, right on the horse, they wanted to kill Ellie, and David stops him. He's like, no, but if you want vengeance so bad, go find him and take care of him. But like I said, that one guy's coming down the stairs, and Joel, and I was so nervous that, like, I was on hand. It was like pins and needles, because I'm worried for Joel, like, with this guy coming down. But sure enough, Joel's up, and he takes him out, and then he uses his body to get the other two in. And then he's got him tied up, and he basically says to the one guy, as he's torturing him, you know, talking about popping out his kneecap with his knife, and he says, you're going to point here where we are and where Ellie is, and then you better be, and your friend better have the same thing. But after he does that, he basically just kills that guy, and then the second guy, he's like, you know, I'm not telling you shit, you know, and Joel's like, it's okay, I believe him. And then he went and Negan'd the guy, and I was like, oh my goodness. And of course Joel is not 100%, but he is fueled by finding where Ellie is. He is 100% there. Then we find out that she's kind of locked up in a prison, and you see this David guy, he's talking to her, and you're starting to realize how much of a psychopath this man really is. And he's basically telling her that he can be there, he can be your protector. And then there's like kind of a really odd scene where Ellie, you think Ellie is going to, and of course throughout this she's being a smartass and she's swearing at him, but there's a moment where he puts his hands on the side of the prison gate, and she puts it, and then he's like putting his hand on her hand. This was just kind of a really weird, like, kind of a disturbing moment. I'm like, this guy is not right. But Ellie, being the badass that she was, grabs his finger and breaks it. She tries to get the key, but is not successful. Then they come back to get. Then after he comes back with James later, but she notices that there's an ear on the ground, and she realizes that they're eating their own fucking people. This is Terminus all over again. Immediately I'm thinking of Gareth, and I'm like, oh my god, this guy is kind of a combination. This guy is literally a true psychopath, sociopath. This guy is completely gone. Eventually, you know, they take her out, and they're going to throw her on this table that's there, and they're getting ready to cut her up and basically eat her. It's like, you had your opportunity. But then we find out that she bit him, and she's saying what saved her basically in that moment is that she said she's infected, and then we see that she bit him. Now I'm wondering, can she spread the cordyceps to someone else? We don't really find out in this episode if that's possible, but she then grabs the butcher knife that because he had stuck in the table. She grabs it and slices James right in the neck. Of course, that's the guy who voices Joel in the game. And then David, you know, he picks up and starts shooting her, and that was a gruesome death. That was really badass. Then finally, you know, and then we see Joel, and he's looking like he's coming back to be a hero. He's finding, and he comes in this one building, and he sees probably one of the most gruesome and kind of eerie things that I've seen in an episode for a while, and it's the bodies of their people that they've already started eating and consuming, and they're just hanging there, freezing in the cold, and that's what they've been eating. He's been feeding them, but as we learned when he talked to Ellie, that he just wasn't telling them, and he was saying only a couple people knew, but he is their protector. He is their father. You know, God spoke to him. Like I said, this guy is nuts. But now we're in this one building, and Ellie has this this hot red amber that she took from the fireplace. She throws it at him. The building's starting to go on fire, and And this scene that's coming was crazy, because eventually she ends up stabbing him too later on, and then David ends up kicking her. The whole background, the building's on fire, and which is just raising the tension level. He ends up kicking her on the ground, and this next scene is brought me back to the Claimers, the moment that we see, when Daryl arrived after they had captured Rick and Carl and Michonne, because this was that disturbing. He eventually gets her on the ground after, beating her up, and there's two things that he says, and he says, the fighting is the part I like the most, after he was slapping her. And then he said, don't be afraid, there is no fear in love. And clearly this was about to be an SA moment, and it's just like I said, this is one of those moments where the scene grabs you, and if the actors and the writing of the scene just come together, this scene gave me chills, because eventually she channeled her inner Rick Grimes, if you will, and she took that butcher knife that she had her, and she just went crazy, just like Rick did with the red machete in the church, or like Rick did on the Claimer leader after that guy was on top of Carl. You remember the scene? That was one of those scenes that just kind of grab you, kind of similar like the moment where the governor had, Maggie and Glenn in that room. It was that the scene was chilling, and then she just goes off and she's like cutting them, and if you look at her face, the look in her eyes, she pulled this off brilliantly. Eventually, obviously, he dies, and she goes out and she sees Joel, and Joel is like, it's me, and she's all shooken up, and and he calls her baby girl. Now this is what he called his daughter, but now he called Ellie his baby girl. So now you realize just how far they have come from day one. And my goodness, this episode affected me, but I want to know, how did it affect you? Did you guys like this episode as much? This is, in my opinion, best episode of the entire series so far, where you got Scott Shepherd and Ellie putting on absolutely brilliant performances. Like, seriously, when a scene or an episode gives you chills like that, where it really gets that, like I said, this is the first time this series has done that for me. But yeah, absolutely wow. I thought it was cool that they had, Troy Baker in there, who is, of course, the voice of Joel in the video game. That was an awesome cameo. I'm glad they got to do that. But what is next? I want to hear from you. What did you guys think of this episode? Did it affect you like it did me? What did you think of the acting? What was your favorite scene? What questions did you have? But yeah, I absolutely love this episode. And as always, I want to thank you guys for taking the time to watch and come to my channel. I love you guys, and we'll see you in that final episode. Love you.